All right, good afternoon and welcome to Supply Chain Now Radio. We are broadcasting live today from the supply chain capital of the country, Atlanta, Georgia. My name is Scott Luton. I'm your host for today's session. Now, in today's live webinar, we're going to be discussing the new normal that we all live in, the Amazon era. We'll be gaining insights and best practices for how to optimize supply chain performance in this modern age of two-day delivery or worse. Our guest speaker today is Lisa Anderson, founder and president of LMA Consulting Group Incorporated. More about Lisa in just a moment, but as always, we're glad to have you with us here today on Supply Chain Now Radio. So let's tackle our ground rules real quick. All attendees will be on mute as we're looking to optimize the audio experience. Now, with that said, let's make it as interactive as possible. So please do submit your questions via the chat toolbar. We'll answer as many as we have time for at the conclusion of today's webinar. And finally, a PDF of today's presentation and recording will be available in the next few days to each of our attendees. So let's take a minute to recognize our sponsors here on Supply Chain Now Radio. Big thanks to our sponsor, Apex Atlanta, which has been serving the Metro Atlanta community since 1964. Apex Atlanta is a nonprofit industry association dedicated to the supply chain management space. To learn more, visit us at apexatlanta.org. Special thanks to our sponsor, TalentStream, a WeBank certified recruiting and staffing firm that specializes in helping organizations find top talent in the engineering, manufacturing, and supply chain space. To learn more, visit us at talentstreamstaffing.com. Real quick note on sponsorship. Due to a wide variety of new programs and series, we're speaking with new potential sponsors. If you might be interested, shoot us a note to scott@supplychainnowradio.com. Okay, let's introduce our speaker today. Backed by popular demand for our third time with Supply Chain Now Radio is Lisa Anderson, the founder and president of LMA Consulting Group Incorporated, a consulting firm that specializes in manufacturing strategy and end-to-end supply chain transformation that maximizes the customer experience and enables profitable, scalable, dramatic business growth. She has worked with clients ranging from closely held to private equity backed to large, complex global organizations. Lisa has been named in the top 46 most influential in the supply chain by SAP, a top 40 B2B tech influencer by the Arceti Group, and a top 50 ERP influencer by Washington Frank. She recently published I've Been Thinking, an inspiring collection of 101 strategies for creating bold customer promises and profits. Lisa is a regular content contributor on topics including providing a superior customer experience with S&OP, advancing innovation, and navigating growth and change. She is regularly interviewed and quoted by publications such as Industry Week, TED Magazine, and the Wall Street Journal. Lisa holds a bachelor's from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and an MBA from Cal State Fullerton. With all that said, please join me in welcoming Miss Lisa Anderson.
All right, well, thank you. So today we're going to talk a bit about the resilient supply chain. And we'll start that off with our current market conditions. So, why even worry about a resilient supply chain? So we'll take a step back here and first talk about the Amazon effect. So when I'm saying Amazon effect, I mean it like a metaphor. I work with manufacturers and distributors, supply chain organizations mainly, ranging from real small to really large. And very few, if any, compete directly with Amazon. With that said, every single one has been impacted by Amazon significantly. With, as Scott pointed out, lead times have been dramatically reduced. I would say across the board, whether we're talking aerospace, which typically speaking has longer lead times, like perhaps 13 weeks, they've been cut in half. In food and beverage, which depends on which food and beverage place, but let's just say 1 to 2 weeks is not an unreasonable average. Their lead times have been cut in half. And even like building products, which is strangely enough, much more concerned about lead time than even food and beverage. Like they may have had a 2-day lead time several years ago, and that's been cut in half. So now same day is pretty much required. And across the board, in healthcare as well, I recently gave a speech to a group of healthcare professionals and ones that make products that support healthcare, and their lead times have been cut in half. So it doesn't matter the industry we're talking about specifically within it. Lead times have been slashed. In addition to lead times being slashed, we're expecting round the clock kind of service, 24/7 accessibility, and easy returns. Basically just think Amazon, and it doesn't matter. B2B is expecting the same type of service. So that has definitely changed the landscape. A superior customer experience is what it's all about, and standing out from the crowd is getting a little bit harder every day. So how do we do that? The other big themes that are going on out there are digitization and data. So basically technology. You probably don't open your computer and see the latest newspaper, if you will, or media alerts. Go to a client or go into work and don't hear something about the change of technology and all that's going on in technology today. There is complete industries that are concerned over the artificial intelligence and what's going to happen. There's some dramatic statistics surrounding that, and especially in supply chain. I happen to be located in the inland Southern California area, which is the #1 area for supply chain in the country, mainly because we have the LA and Long Beach ports, which are the big daddy ports, if you will, that where we bring in lots and lots of products from Asia, and certainly we have a ton consumers and people in this area. So there's lots of supply chain type organizations as well as manufacturers, more and more as Amazon takes place, because what that means is everybody wants everything really quickly and they want it customized. So how do we do that? So supply chain is prevalent, and it's going to be very impacted by this technology transformation, because there's some statistics from like the University of Redlands that say that by 2020, 2021, there's going to be vast numbers of jobs that are going to change and or be eliminated. So anyway, there's bunches of AI impacts, IoT. I think I have some more slides on some of these, robotics, automation. The Apex Inland Empire chapter, we do a couple of executive panels and networking symposiums per year, and our next topic is about this very topic. I wish, Scott, that you could be in this area, because it's about the talent transformation. And people or robots, who's going to win out, if you will, which really is a catchy title, because we obviously have to work together. But anyway, digitization and data is another key market trend. Volatility and uncertainty. I mean, it's become the norm. I mean, we've kind of become immune to all the volatility and uncertainty that go on every day. But it's very prevalent. I mean, there are things we cannot control, which seem to be happening with a vengeance, including things like terrorism and natural disasters and hurricanes and port strikes. And well, I guess port strikes to some degree you can control, although an individual company that's ordering products can't control a port strike. So there's bunches of things that you can't control, and then there's some things that are volatile and uncertain that I would argue that you can control. So there's companies that are going out of business because they grow so quickly they run out of cash, and there's people who are growing so quickly and are really, really successful, but from one day to the next, 1 year to the next, they're increasing by double. So there's just bunches of volatility and uncertainty that play into the minds of executives, and what are they going to do to manage under these certain times. So one of the things that I like to give an example that's actually relatively unrelated, and that is the stock market. There used to be times when a 100-point swing in a day was like a big deal. Everybody got all crazy about it. Now everybody doesn't even barely notice whether the stock market, unless it goes, it has to be pretty dramatic for people to even notice in a general sense. So, that just shows how immune we've become to all this volatility. And then the last area here is capacity shortages. So how do we find the talent, the right skills? You might find people, but are they the right people, and do they have the right skills? And it's not just all about people. Do we have the right machines? Do we have the right types of buildings? Do our buildings have the right capacities in them? There's all sorts of capacity shortages that clients bring up on it's a very common theme. When I'm called into a client, it's usually because they're impacted by these 4 market conditions. They don't say it that way, but that's what they all say. So I talked a little bit about each of these, but I'll go into them in a little bit more depth. So on the customer side, I talked about lead time compression. So that one is just so prevalent. I mean, these days Amazon delivers in like 2 days is expected, and expected to be free, really. 1 day is pretty common. I mean, even my mom, who doesn't order things from Amazon, knows how to pick up the phone and call me, and I order things for her on Amazon. And she has become accustomed to very rapid turnaround, because Amazon apparently happens to have a DC located in Phoenix. And so she can get things same day a lot of times. So when I end up with an item that requires a week, she's thinking, wow, that's a really long time. Whereas 2 years ago, she would have thought that was a really short time. So things change. So lead times are compressed. OTIF, so on time in full, it's one of those metrics that people call it different things, but on time in full has become relatively commonplace, and people like Walmart are constantly sending out communications that they're going to charge people if they don't have on time in full performance, and they're raising the seriousness or the impacts of if you don't have it. So in the consumer products industry, which I do have several clients in, it's a big deal, because first of all, they're changing their mind all the time, and then customers are. Yeah, but yet like the Walmart, the Home Depots, the Whole Foods, they're trying to keep up with their consumers, but yet they want their items delivered on time, and they're going to hold us accountable to that. So there's just a lot of activity. With that said, as I mentioned earlier, if there was anybody that was crazy about their lead times, which goes hand in hand with delivering it on time, because you can promise a better lead time, but of course does no good if you actually don't deliver it, is building products. Because as much as it seems to me when I first started working with this industry that it would be pretty clear when a building would be built, and when items would need to come into the building or supporting the building. Because even like I work with a underwater storage tanks company, and I tell you what, everything changes at the last minute all the time. So that's where we get to our last minute picture here, is that is probably the biggest change in the last year or two, is that everything has become last minute. And it's because we don't really know what's going to be happening with our customers, because with all the volatility, who knows what could happen. So we just change our mind. So the CEO of the Ontario, California airport, which happens to be in the Inland Empire, and it's growing hugely. But I love his phrase, so I always give him credit, but I steal it. And that is last mile, which is still very relevant, and certainly in supply chain world, but last mile has become last minute. And he's absolutely correct, because every industry is thinking last minute. Even in aerospace, which has really long lead times, lots of things change at the last minute, and so we have to find ways to accommodate. And then last but not least is being proactive. I'm seeing more and more customers going to the proactive requests where, like, for example, one of the areas that my firm works on pretty frequently is what can sometimes be called collaborative ordering or vendor managed inventory, where I'm working with a client, let's just say a company that supplies a Boeing, as an example. And Boeing is expecting that their customers are going to bring whatever they need in whatever quantities. They'll figure it out for them and bring it to the right location at the right time so that they don't have too much inventory, because nobody wants to tie up cash, but they want to have it available when they need it, because after all, if you hold up the delivery of a plane, that's a big, it's a big problem. And so they're requesting that type of program, but you can get benefits on the other side by doing those types of things into your supply chain that I'll talk about further. But that same type of program happens in healthcare. One of the first places that I implemented it in was with Cardinal Health, who my company supplied all their Cardinal Health facilities throughout the U.S. with what they needed, when they needed it, at the right levels. And that's becoming very common. And it's also very common in terms of consumer products and food and beverage. So like Walmart's and those types of people, you supply them with what they need before they need it. And also customization, which is a whole nother matter, is also very prevalent. So not only do we want what we want when we want it and we want to change our mind, but we also want you to customize it just for us, which is pretty typical today. So it's a challenging environment to supply, but that is what customers have become, prone to expect. So the next area, digitization and data. I talked a little bit about some of these, but I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. So one of the areas that my business focuses on quite a bit, and I actually have several clients currently because it's becoming very popular, so I think it's something to bring up here, is ERP, which why we call it ERP, I'm not totally sure, because enterprise resource planning systems are really just a system we use to ship and receive and bill and all those types of things, transact inventory. They're becoming more and more important in the sense that even small customers, small clients, small companies are requiring more and more functionality, that's base functionality, to a system like an ERP system that's pushing them out of things like QuickBooks into systems sooner, because they have to be able to make these they have to be able to meet these customer needs without spending a fortune. And so it's requiring that they look at their base platform, which is typically ERP, sooner. But it's also on the other end of the spectrum, because people are, in the past, had customized their systems, and there's lots of mergers and acquisitions going on, especially depending upon where you live. And, it almost doesn't matter, because if you're in an area with small and medium-sized family businesses, which there's a ton of those types of manufacturers in the Inland Empire, as an example, they are, starting to become at the age where they're looking to sell. And that involves lots of the big conglomerates that we've been talking about here, the multi-billion-dollar companies who are looking at buying up smart buys. It also involves private equity firms, and it also involves other family-owned businesses that are thinking, you know what, I think I want to buy a complementary product line. Well, all of that means you have to combine these companies together in a way that allows you to service your customers, which is also requiring ERP systems. So from that point of view, there is a trend towards ERP systems and modernized ERP systems, because the other thing is that if you bought an ERP system like 10 years ago, there's just so many things that the modern ERP systems have that complement your ability to service customers in a better way, a superior way today, like e-commerce systems and customer CRM, customer relationship management systems, and lots of the functionality behind the scenes from an operational perspective. So I see ERP trending. The other thing is AI and predictive analytics. I've talked a little bit about that. We for sure see lots of conversation about this, but also lots of progress in terms of manufacturing, supply chain, and related organizations. And it's also creating a lot of concern from the talent side of things. And let's see, we have data protection. So, oh my gosh, I just got out of a meeting this morning. We were talking about cybersecurity, and it comes up all the time. It seems like something that you'll just, it'll be fine. It's not just fine. The small and mid-sized clients have lots and lots of problems with this, but so does big companies. So it's more and more important that you find a way to protect your data and protect yourself from cybersecurity trends. So that's and it's, of course, the field's becoming more complicated. It's not as easy as it used to be to handle these types of things. So it's certainly something that's raising its head in terms of importance. And then robotics and automation. I talked a bit about that before, but certainly almost every client I work with in one way or another is thinking, which aspects of my business should I automate, or which is, robotics is another way of automating. So which aspects of my business should I automate? Because after all, I have to find a way to be competitive, be successful, and raise the bar in terms of the customer service I can provide, which in the right ways, it makes a lot of sense to automate. However, like with everything else, if you just automate across the board, I've seen people who automate all sorts of things thinking that they're going to save money, and it actually costs them double the money because they weren't thinking there is a strategic use of people in automation. Volatility and uncertainty, I talked a bit about this. Certainly we can talk about the trade wars. I mean, there's all sorts of, volatility associated with that. I know there's the ports in Atlanta, the ports here, with all the uncertainty surrounding, the trade. There was stockpiles of ships out here looking at trying to get in before the increases in tariffs. So global trade is definitely one of those areas. And then political risk is another. So I don't think that I have any client that actually sources 100% of their products and components and materials from just the United States. They might think they are, but then if they're sourcing it from someone else in the U.S., there's someone that those people are getting products and services from elsewhere. So everybody has to understand what's happening throughout the world, just to try to run their business. Schedule volatility, for sure, that's a challenge, as everything is last minute and changed. Schedule volatility is huge. And then last but not least, there's market trends. So like, for example, one of the market trends that I'm seeing happening right now is a trend towards vertical integration, which is really kind of interesting because things come and things go. In the planning and scheduling world, there's like, I'm always talking to clients, I'm going to decentralize scheduling. Now I'm going to centralize scheduling. And they always think that these things are going to like solve everything. But it just swings back and forth. And so it's the same here with the vertical integration, or do we outsource everything? What do we do? But I'm seeing more and more examples where people are thinking, how do I keep control of all these moving factors, at least the things that are strategic to my ability to supply people who want changes, last minute stuff. And so they're looking more towards vertical integration. And even the people like the big aerospace, like Boeing and some of the tier one aerospace types of folks, they're looking at doing more than they were before, which is creating, of course, stress for the people that were previously doing those types of roles. So there's a lot of market trends to be aware of. We talked a bit about capacity shortages, so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly here, but certainly skilled resources are in high demand. It does not matter where you are located. I have clients actually throughout the U.S. And actually, I have one in Atlanta that I've been working with on an ERP system, but nevertheless, I have them throughout the U.S. and actually globally, because a lot of my clients have multiple locations. And skilled resources is a common problem. It almost doesn't matter where you are. I mean, with that said, there are certain areas like Southern California that has access to more skilled resources than a small town, in the middle of the Midwest, if you will. However, with that said, there is a lot of demand as well. So it really doesn't seem to matter. There's lots of shortages when it comes to skilled resources. I mean, especially as we have more automation and technology, the skills and people who are willing to learn and gain additional skills is the key. So that also kind of goes hands in hand with engineering and technical abilities, but by all means, Scott should be very, very busy looking for engineering and tech resources. There's just a big demand, and it's not going to be going away anytime soon. Then there's production capacity. I mean, if there was one common problem with all of my clients that have challenges meeting these customer demands, it would be capacity. It could be production capacity, and it could be, on the resource side, which is going to be a labor capacity constraint. Those two issues, and knowing which one and which area, because it's never a problem across the plant. It's just never that way. It's always in one particular area. So identifying and understanding what those issues are and gaining the right approvals throughout your organization to get the right decisions to happen is, for some reason, no easy task. So it's something that is extremely common. And part of the problem with getting approval is probably being able to prove out like why you're saying this without getting like perfect data, moving beyond that. So anyway, we could talk about that for a long time, but we won't. So we'll move on to support resources. So support resources, the people that who are running these ERP systems, your planning group, purchasing group, there's just lots and lots of shortages in those areas. So what does all this mean? So we have impact and pressures. My goodness, we have lots of customer pressures out there. So not always is it as angry as this person appears on the phone here, but sometimes it is. But in essence, with what the customers are expecting today, the answer isn't, pushing back in a smart way is, of course, always a good idea. And finding a way to make sure that you can provide your customer with what their end objective is, even if what they're requesting isn't really the, what's going to meet their end objective. You find a way to meet their ultimate end objective is always something you're wanting to do, assuming that you are charging for your value and not for just, charging based on what your costs are, because that's a whole different matter. But if you're charging based on value and you're trying to meet your customers' needs, you have to meet them. So the key question is, how are we going to do this in a way that's successful and profitable and doesn't run you out of cash? Because you may have to have inventory everywhere throughout the U.S. and globally in order to support that, and that's probably not going to work. So that's really the key today, is understanding your customers' real needs and their priorities, because if you ask a customer, well, is this a priority, is that a priority? Of course they're going to tell you everything's a priority. However, when you really get into understanding what's really important to them, like what's going to stop their line, what's going to make their life easier so they can grow their business so that you can grow yours, really understanding that can go a very long way. It's not just understanding that demand and which products, it's also understanding what they're likely to sell and which areas of the country, which areas of the world are they likely to sell more of. Because if you have inventory, it's true of capacity and inventory. If I have yet to meet a client that didn't have capacity and didn't have people and didn't have inventory pretty much to meet their needs. With that said, whether it's in the right place with the right skills and at the right time is a whole nother matter. So it's understanding what this in enough detail to support your business, but not getting so mired in detail that you actually accomplish nothing, because that, I find, on the other side of things happens just as often. So it's a happy medium here. The squeeze, I was kind of talking about this a little bit with the aerospace example, where I gave you half the example anyway. So the Boeings of the world are thinking about, why don't I start supplying some more of the spare parts as an example, because they can make some profit there. At the other end of the spectrum, we have the people who make the metal that go on, the mills that make the metal, and outside processors, which are people who do painting and finishing and those kinds of things. And they, for some reason, the two extremes seem to have more of the power than the people in the middle. So people in the middle are getting squeezed, and that doesn't necessarily mean squeezed out, although it could. If they're not very resilient, they will be squeezed out. But it does mean that they have to be better, stronger, more proactive, more of a partner to make it work. And that's not just aerospace. I then went to a conference that related to consumer products and retail, and they were complaining about the exact same problem. And it almost didn't matter what industry I went to, they were complaining about the same problem. So this type of a squeeze is sort of commonplace, and we have to find a way to be more flexible, agile, resilient, and successful in managing this situation, which really means you have to be on top of it. For the apex crowd in this conversation, we should be very familiar with this, the bullwhip effect that I'm talking about now, which is if the end, let's say you have 4 different people in your supply chain, you have your end customer, and it goes through, retail, let's say, and then it goes to before that it was at a distributor, and before that it was at a manufacturer, and before that it was at a subcontract manufacturer, and before that it was a material supplier. Well, the further you go back into your supply chain, the last minute thing and the last minute changes that your end customer is making at all times during this process are coming back to you in very extreme waves that are unrelated to what's happening on the other end of the supply chain, which is creating havoc, because basically you'll have all the wrong inventory and lots of it in all the wrong places, or all the wrong capacity in all the wrong places to support your end customer, but it appears as though that's what they need. So, this bullwhip effect creates havoc for all of us. So we have to find a way to get more proactively in front of it. And then last but not least is cost pressures are rising when we look at, well, it's not very surprising, because if we're trying to provide Amazon-like service quicker, which transportation is a big topic today, that's another one of those market trends I could have talked about, because it's very hard to find trucking and other providers in transportation, but let's just stick with trucking right now. It's hard to find a truck at the right time. You have to be more attractive as a beneficial cargo owner or a manufacturer. That's you have to be more attractive to them, which basically means you have to be willing to accept their deliveries when they arrive, and you have to be more accommodating just to even get a load, let alone what the price of that load might be. So there's lots of pressures in terms of increasing costs, increasing material prices, transportation costs. With all these last minute changes, there's all sorts of costs that are rising. And it depends on your industry. Like when I was in absorbent products, where we supplied like adult diapers to healthcare and the pads that go underneath chicken in the grocery stores to the food processors, material and transportation costs were the keys. So material was most of our cost of goods sold. So did it matter if I was hiring people? Well, sure. The board of directors would ask me about that more than anything else, even though it was not nearly as big a cost as materials and transportation. But from our thinking, the way to get more successful and what actually worked was to focus more attention and maybe even hire more expertise when it came to how do we save material costs and how do we partner with suppliers to come up with better formulations. That's more of a win-win. So cost controls are, or I should say cost pressures are really rising. And what happened during that time is that after we gave our private equity backers forecasts and information, of course, what do you know? The oil and gas prices started to rise pretty dramatically, which was a big problem because in our case, about 60-70% of our product costs were related to these price increases, which of course private equity backers did not care about my problems. So with that said, what do you think? We have to do something to proactively find a way to reduce that material cost, at the same time not keep our customer performance high, which was the performance of the adult diaper, let's say. So that's the trick that a lot of customers are facing today. And the same thing happened in transportation, because we were facing higher transport costs, because as you can imagine, these diapers are fluffy, and so they're big. And so that's a big problem when it comes to transportation costs. So there's lots of things to think about. So really the path forward is to create a resilient supply chain. And I mean one that is flexible and thinking about all these factors and staying on top of them so that you can successfully navigate that environment. And so as a couple of, I've talked about some of these throughout, but I'll give you a couple of tips on how to do that. So one is, strangely enough, the basics work really well. And so people think about fancy solutions when they aren't necessary. What is necessary is going back to the priorities. The question is, which of these 100 things I need to do today, because every client I go into has 100 things they need to be doing just today. Which of these things are the priorities, and which ones of these are, going to create, like, free up the bottleneck? Because I can work on something that's very important, but if it's not going to keep, like, let's say in a manufacturing environment, keep your product flowing and moving along, if there's multiple stages in the process, or in distribution, if it's going to keep products moving, it's all about turnover and speed. If things are going to keep moving, even if I'm going to save $10,000 here, $100,000 there, yeah, that sounds like a big priority. It depends on what your size is. $1 million even. Why would I think of not focusing on $1 million project? Well, because if it doesn't relate to the 80-20 of my business and keeping products flowing in distribution and moving in manufacturing as an example, it may just not be your priority. And that's hard to explain sometimes when people hear things like $1 million. But I can tell you that more of my clients have been successful by doing things that sound at first like they would be counterintuitive than in any other way. So focusing on priorities is a key piece. Innovation. Like, we could have an entire webinar on innovation, so I obviously cannot go into it in that depth. But that is really the key, because the blocking and tackling, the solid execution that you hear all about, and APIX is fabulous education to get you to the point of understanding what is the fundamentals you need to know, is important and is critical. But it's not going to get you to the point where you're successful, unfortunately, anymore. Instead, you have to do that and be focused on that, and then take it to the new level and find ways to innovate. So the good news here is that innovation does not need to be that you create the new sticky note like 3M did a long time ago, which is even hard to do. They did it by accident, and that's no easy thing to recreate an accident. It doesn't have to be that way. It has to be that you're thinking about new and creative ways of recombining things that already exist, that new ways of doing things, like the lean kind of concepts. There are innovative transportation programs, partnering with customers, partnering with competitors. What a strange thing. I lead these Harvey Mudd executive panel or Harvey Mudd executive roundtables with the head of the manufacturing practice at Harvey Mudd. And we got a group of executives together. Well, we do this a couple of times a year. And one of our topics was on competition. And by the time we left the meeting, every single CEO in there said that they had collaborated with a competitor under these circumstances. And it made sense. So sometimes it's just doing the odd thing. But it's also creating a culture of innovation requires that you focus in on talent. It really means that, and it doesn't necessarily mean, although of course you want to bring on the right talent, but it's creating talent also. And it's supporting people in their ideas. Think about it this way. If you're going to have failures when you're innovating. So you have to be able to celebrate a failure, and you have to be able to be even willing to celebrate a failure when it creates a problem at month end. And if you're willing to do that, then you could be on your road to innovation, because the next one is going to be a wild success. But if you kill, well, not literally, but if you harm your employees or your collaborators when they make mistakes, you are going to have a problem. Collaboration within and across the supply chain, I was sort of just referring to that as well by saying collaborating with competition, but it doesn't have to be as competition. It could be your customers, your suppliers, it could be your neighbors. A lot of, when it comes to warehousing and space, there could be some definite benefits to collaborating with who you might consider your neighbors, and maybe even sort of a competitor. There could be a lot of wins there, and that could be true in manufacturing too. There's certain types of equipment. Why do we all need the same equipment if we can find a way to collaborate? So I'm seeing that the proactive and successful companies are pursuing this more. And so we get to tools. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I want to make sure we get through some questions. But I talked a bit about ERP, so I don't necessarily have to talk to it again, but I'm seeing that data and business analysis is a key driver on every ERP project that I work on. So every ERP selection project, one of their key drivers is I need to get the data out of my system, and I need to do something in a meaningful way, because actually in today's world there's an overload of data. So it's just, how do I get meaningful information so I can make good business decisions, and how do I do that fast? The bottom line here. And how do we also leverage ERP and automate processes and improve upon our processes so that we can take our customer service to the next level while also making money and having less inventory? That's really the key. And it's not all about ERP. It's all of the tools and technologies and applications that we could be using. So with all that said about technology, I have to remind us that high tech, the more high tech we go, the more high touch that's required. So it's really kind of a weird conundrum, but the more that we use technology, the more that people value the face-to-face, which is one of the reasons, like, for example, I was talking about this executive panel and networking symposium. Well, it's a face-to-face meeting, and we get like 100 people plus there. Why is that? Because the more that we can do remotely, the more that we actually need to interact and connect with one another. And we're more likely to do business with and collaborate with people that we know, like, and trust. So we have to be able to build that. And so I'm going to wrap up with SIOP, which is another idea here. So if you can balance your demand, which I talked about a little bit before, so having a better idea of what you're really going to sell, which is no easy task, but it's very doable. This is probably the area where I've had more success getting clients with improved service, improved margins, and improved inventory levels than any other, is to get their demand and their supply aligned. And more important to that, it's to get their areas of the organization, their sales, their operations, their R&D, their finance people, all on the same page is the trick to achieving success. And so that's what this is showing here, is that you can improve, you can create a win-win-win through things like SIOP. So this is the last slide, Scott, and then we'll turn it over to questions, because I have my question slide, but it's after your other slides, I think, so I can always zip through those. But your team, remember that all this technical stuff that we've been talking about doesn't do any good at all if you don't have the right people. People are really your number one asset. I go into clients and they're talking about machines and ERP systems and things that I'm, wanting to talk about too. But really none of that matters, because I've been consulting for 14 years, and the most successful clients are those that consider their people the number one asset, and they find a way to supplement and do all those projects we were talking about, but they consider their people to be the most important, that they are ultimately the most successful in achieving results. So Scott, I think I'll turn it over to you to see if we have any questions.
Great. And so to our audience, we've got 3:45 Eastern Time, 12:45 West Coast Time. We're going to take the next 10 minutes or so and provide you the opportunity to pose questions to Lisa Anderson. Lisa, in all the we've got a valuable resource here that works with a lot of companies at all levels of leadership, and this is your free opportunity to pick her brain. And so with that said, Lisa, I'm going to lead off with one question. We kind of finished, one last comment to our attendees. Feel free to submit questions via the chat toolbar, and then I will pose those to Lisa verbally, and we look forward to your questions. But first question, Lisa, I love how you wrapped up your presentation about how people are your number one asset. We talked throughout the presentation about the value of talent, and in this day and age, there, as we all know, there's a war for talent. How have you seen some of the companies you work with, or some other examples? How do you see companies successfully competing for the talent they need and winning the talent they need in order to compete in the Amazon era?
Well, actually, I think it goes back to your culture and your leadership, because people work for people. They don't work for companies. And these days they can tell. They can look online and see what's being said about the people that work there, your leaders that work there. So I'm finding that people can win the war on talent, if you will, if you're doing the right things. If you're focusing on, if you're investing in your employees, you're appreciating your employees, but you're also holding them accountable. I mean, strange things like that. People would think, well, I don't know, I'm not sure that I really want to give people the hard feedback to provide because I don't want to lose them. But really, the best, most skilled, high talent employees want proactive feedback, both constructive and the pat on your back kind of thing. And they want to see that you're actually working with the low performers, because everybody knows who they are, except for leaders most of the time, it seems. And so when they see that you're doing something to proactively address and move things forward, they tend to stick around. And so part of it these days is not losing your top talent, but it's also gaining it. And so from that point of view, you need to be focused on your culture, and actually also doing something exciting. So people today are interested in innovation and having the ability to make a difference and have their ideas heard. And at the same time, they're interested a lot in sustainability, and that you're proactively looking at how you can improve the environment and improve, how you can be sustainable in a way that makes sense for the business.
Fantastic. Next, thanks for taking the time to share that perspective there, Lisa. Next question comes from an Apex legend in his own right. Chuck, thanks for tuning in. Chuck wants you to clarify an acronym that you shared, Lisa, OTIF. Can you explain what that is and explain why it's important?
Sure. So that's on time in full. So what that means is when you have a customer order, let's say you have to ship, 100 pieces of something to Chicago, to your customer in Chicago by the 12th. So what this means is that on time means you get it there by the 12th, and it's at their dock on time. But in full is the part that's been added into this equation in the last several years. That's really quite important. Now I forgot what I told you, but let's just say they had 100 pieces they were supposed to get. I think I may have said 12, but whatever, 100 pieces. Well, sending 98 even is not sufficient. It's not full. So you want to send the complete order on time and in full. And then basically, the other piece of this is that you want the invoices and everything else to be accurate throughout the process as well. But that's what it refers to.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Chuck. Great question there. Next question comes from Ika. Ika, thanks for joining us here today. What are some big challenges you see companies face in the SIOP space?
Well, actually, most of the people who I've worked with to implement SIOP don't necessarily realize that that's what we're doing. So it depends on how sophisticated we're talking about here. But I would say that as far as really implementing SIOP, people get hung up in the data. So they're like, well, I got to get this great, perfect forecast, and then I'll worry about the rest. Well, no, no, no. We figure out what's the 80-20, and we get a forecast that's directionally correct, and then they worry a lot about capacity because, of course, no system is perfect, and well, I've yet to meet a perfect, capacity analysis. But if you start with the areas of your operation that you know are the most critical, are the gateways, are the bottlenecks, and then you just take a directionally correct view. There's one client where one of the executives I work with that she started using my phrase all the time too. She's like, well, we're just working on directionally correct information here. So one that you're comfortable in making a decision. I find that the biggest problem is people not moving forward with the right things they need to be doing soon enough. Like they wait too long. It's true across the board. They even do the same in the ERP. It's so expensive, but they wait too long, and then they're dead in the water. Well, in this case, they wait too long to do whatever they need to do. Get approvals to hire new people, to hire temps, to buy a new machine, to cross-train. It's not like you can just do these things at the drop of a hat. So but the symptom behind that is that they're waiting for perfection, basically. So it's when you're 80% there, and you're directionally correct, you know that you're going to be making a good decision overall. It's to move. I'd say that's probably one of the biggest things is and then to get people to understand what SIOPs are all about, which is really about getting on the same page with all these different resources, because everybody has a different view. Like finance, of course, is interested in margins, and they're also interested in usually low inventory levels, and they are interested in, like in one client, they were very interested in overhead rates, but on a monthly basis. So that flew in the face of what sales needed, which is to have customer service at a high level, especially with their A items. But that flew in the face because they gave these enormous orders every now and then, perhaps just because that's how they happened to come in, and they could have done something different, but they didn't. And so operations couldn't do this was in the middle here. They were trying to do things efficiently and reduce inventory levels, but who suffers in the end is that all these goals were not aligned because finance was on a different page from operations, was on a different page from sales, and whoever won the battle that day did not win the war. So we had to get everybody aligned. So that would really be the other piece. That's there's a lot of technical pieces of SIOP, but most of the successful clients that have gained the most, and we've had some substantial results. Like I said, that's the biggest impact on clients that I've seen. But it's really about aligning people more than anything else.
Always comes back to people. People are critical. Even in this day and age of technology and everything's being automated, you still have to have people making critical decisions and serving their customers, right?
Yep, exactly.
Yep. So one last question before we wrap up with some announcements, Lisa. I know that you are involved in APICS leadership, do a lot with your local APICS chapter, and many of the folks on the webinar here now know that APICS is now part of the ASCM universe, the Association for Supply Chain Management, which is going to really propel APICS and the body of knowledge for the Amazon era and to be able to offer more things to companies and individuals looking to improve their performance. Speak to, if you would, Lisa, as a APICS volunteer leader and volunteer and member, speak to the value proposition that you receive and have received in your APICS involvement.
Well, so we actually had a board meeting last weekend, so I was telling them the same thing you were just saying, is what is it that's going to provide value to each of you so that we can find a way to make that work, because then that's going to make us more successful in promoting value to our members. So I would say for me, I joined APICS a very long time ago when I was in my corporate career. Unfortunately, I guess, in a way, I was traveling like crazy when I was a Vice President of Operations and Supply Chain, so I didn't get to go to that many meetings, but I found, value in staying on top of the latest trends then as well. And then when I started consulting, typically speaking, the people who bring me on board with clients are going to be the CEOs, the CFO, a general manager, which is not necessarily commonplace as Apex members. So I didn't know what I was going to experience, but I thought it was a good way to give back, and Apex certainly has great education. But what I found is that, it's been really a very nice win-win for me personally, because it's a good way to stay in tune with what's happening in your local community. What are the pressing challenges that are in your region versus nationally and globally, which sometimes align and sometimes are very different. So it's a great way to do that. It's also a good way to get ideas. So when you're trying to, implement system functionality or trying to do a particular process improvement, being able to call up Apex colleagues, which I can tell you I've done many times, even within the last 6 months, and said, look, I have this client problem. Have you ever seen this before? Or do you know, how can I get the concept of MRP across so that the planners understand why, how the impact they're having on purchasing or whatever. So, getting ideas of how to solve problems and take and gain results is a really big benefit that I gained from Apex. And also, of course, in my case, I since I'm working with manufacturers and distributors, I find that it's a complementary universe. Like, they know who I am, and projects come up, and they may refer me into people who need help, and I see that they have certain challenges, and I refer them to other resources and trusted advisors and other people that can help them. So I found that it's been very beneficial. My board members, who are in most of them are in full-time jobs, say that they get the most value from the ideas, staying on top of trends, giving them an opportunity to communicate and step out as a leader. In terms of this community has been really beneficial to their careers and finding the next job, if you will.
Fantastic. And just scrolling through the attendees we have on the webinar right now, we've got Apex leaders dialed in, and non-Apex folks, but Apex leaders from New Jersey to Savannah to, of course, California with Lisa to the upstate of South Carolina. So really neat community, and I like how Lisa put it. It provides a go-to resource as we try to tackle the challenges that we have to tackle in supply chain. So thanks for sharing that, Lisa. And on that note, that concludes our Q&A session today. Big thanks to all the fantastic questions we got. Lisa, thanks for taking the time to take those questions from our audience. Appreciate your time and perspective today. We're going to be concluding our session this afternoon on a few final items. So first off, as you see in front of you, Supply Chain Now Radio is pleased to serve as a media partner for the E-commerce Operations Summit in Columbus, Ohio, which is set to take place April 9th through the 11th. Great speakers, including our own Ashley Libke, set to share their perspective. A lot of great tours, great networking programs. You can learn more at operationssummit.com. And then next up, we want to make sure you're aware of I4 Transport's 3PL and Supply Chain Summit here in Atlanta, the Supply Chain City, June 2019. EFT is bringing some of the biggest industry names right here to Atlanta for 3 days of thought leadership and executive level networking. I think the count's up to 800 folks, executives set to join us. We're also pleased to be a media partner for this event. We're going to be broadcasting live from this event at the World Congress Center here in Atlanta. Cisco, Uber Freight, Land O'Lakes, DHL Supply Chain, UPS, just a few of the companies that will be presenting. You can learn more at events.eft.com, or you can click on the hyperlink that we'll have in the deck, and that will take you to the website. Of course, you can always reach out to us. Finally, check out our website for upcoming webinars, podcasts, and events. That is supplychainnowradio.com. We hope you'll tune in as we broadcast live next week from Velocity 2019 in sunny Orlando, Florida. Of course, if there's anything we can do for you, shoot us a note to Scott with 2 T's at supplychainnowradio.com, and we will We're committed to serve as a resource to our attendees and participants, you name it, to track down information that you might not be able to Google on your end. Lisa, before we conclude today's session, any final thoughts on your end?
So I would say that the key in today's environment of elevated customer expectations, and actually more challenges in terms of maintaining profit and margins, and really how to do this without building up your inventory so that you have everything wherever people want it, would be to really those couple of key tips that I left with is really the key, which is one, to set up a resilient supply chain, which really means doing things like looking at your demand, aligning your demand with your supply in terms of SIOP, and remembering that utilizing technology where it makes sense, not just utilizing it because that's like the best thing to do at the moment. Similar to outsourcing, when everybody was outsourcing, and then we had several panels where people said, you know what, I outsourced to China or Mexico or somewhere, and then once we got there, I figured out, well, we didn't save money, and we do have all these issues. So no one solution is ever right. You have to make sense of things. So be logical and make sense of it, and remember that people are always your number one asset.
Practical application. That's what I heard there, Lisa.
Correct. Practical application, exactly.
Thanks so much. As we wrap up today, I'd like to give a big thanks to one of our favorite recurring guests here on Supply Chain Now Radio, Lisa Anderson with LMA Consulting Group. You can learn more at lma-consultinggroup.com. Special thanks to our sponsors, Apex Atlanta and Talent Stream. Of course, a big thank you to our audience for participating. On behalf of Supply Chain Now Radio, this is Scott Luton concluding today's episode, and we hope to reconnect with you again real soon. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
Thank you.